Hi everybody, this is Laura with Krazy Kool Cakes. This is a tutorial on how I ice my cakes. I have received many requests from subscribers and viewers asking for this specific tutorial. They want to see how I ice my cakes. So this video will show you how I achieve straight sides on my cakes and how I achieve perfectly sharp edges on the top of my cake tiers. So warning, this video is about 22 minutes long. It's pretty long video. So really this is just for people who are really interested in learning how to get sharp edges and smooth sides on their cakes. Okay, so let's get started. What you see here is an 8-inch round tier that I have already crumb coated. It's been sitting in the freezer for about 10-15 minutes. This is what I always do with my crumb coated tiers. I let them chill in the freezer, so when I take this out, the crumb coat is rock hard. Okay, and as you can see, it's not very thick at all. You can actually still see the cake through the crumb coat. This is the actual icing that goes over the crumb coat, and this is the icing that helps me get my cakes nice and smooth. The icing here is a high fat ratio or a thick consistency icing recipe, which uses mainly shortening and confectioner sugar. It's pretty smooth, okay, but still very thick. What you saw me doing is icing the top first, and I iced it pretty straight, okay, with my spatula. And what you see me doing now is I always start with the bottom. And so I'm being very generous with the amount of icing that I'm adding to the cake. You know, it might seem to you like it's a lot of icing, but you'll see towards the end that the majority of the icing is coming off. I always like to start with a lot of icing because it's a lot easier to remove icing than to have to continually be adding icing to get your sides straight. So the thickness of the icing that I'm adding right now, or once it's all completely iced, I would say is going to be about 2 centimeters, okay, about a 1/2 inch thick, and then I'll start removing. What I was showing you there was the thickness of the icing. Then we'll start scraping off the icing little by little to get the sides straight. So I always start with the bottom, okay. There is an 8-inch cake board or cardboard cake board underneath the cake. The cardboard that you see there that's visible is a 10-inch cake board that I put my 8-inch cake board on, and this is used just for icing. Okay, this doesn't stay there, it comes off right before I start stacking my cakes. Once I've added a thick layer of icing all along the bottom, now you see I'm starting to move upward and I'm filling in the gaps, and I have a lot of icing on my spatula because I want to make sure that I have lots of icing that I can pat down and press down into those empty gaps. Okay, so it takes me, I would say, a full recipe of icing to be able to completely cover an 8-inch round tier. This would be a recipe that has about 8 cups of sugar in it. So here I am closing all the gaps, pressing it down, making sure that I don't have any air bubbles or any air trapped inside of the icing. Okay, then I move up to the very top. I want half of the icing that I'm adding to be hanging over the edge, or to be you know, sticking up halfways above the edge, and half of it on the cake itself. And you want to have that excess icing on the top because that's what we're going to be using to get our sharp edges on the top of the tier. So just working my way all the way around, making sure that I have plenty of icing sticking up over the edge of the cake tier. And again, it might seem like quite a bit of icing, and it is, but remember, we're going to get rid of the majority of this icing when we start scraping off. I'm pointing out an area here that didn't have enough icing, or I didn't like the amount of icing it had hanging over, so I added more. Okay, then you're gonna always see that the top part is always gonna be thicker than the bottom. So what I'm doing here is now I'm adding more icing on the bottom because I'm trying to get the same thickness all around the cake from top to bottom to make it easier for me for when I start scraping. So basically all I'm doing is wherever I'm seeing that maybe I didn't add enough icing in the beginning, I'm just going back and adding more to make sure I don't have any large gaps or holes. Okay, what I'm showing you here is a spackling tool, and this has been my saving grace when it comes to icing. This is how I get really straight edges. I bought mine at Hobby Lobby. If you're wondering where to get it, you can go to where they have all the drywall tools, and it's called a spackling tool. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm holding my spackling tool at a 90-degree angle. Try to hold it as straight as you possibly can because the angle at which you hold it, that's going to be the angle of the icing on the side of your cake tier. So if you could see my point of view, if you were like literally right where my eyes are, you would see that the spackling tool is being held completely perpendicular to the cake board on the bottom, as straight as possible. So here I am just slowly turning my turntable as I'm scraping the icing off. You want to just scrape off little by little. You don't want to scrape off humongous chunks all at once because then you're going to pull off a huge slab of your icing. So you want to go slowly and you want to do it little by little. Okay, and if your icing is this smooth, when you are scraping the icing off, then you know that you have a good consistency icing. And you can see by how much is coming off that I'm not pressing that hard into my cake tier. It's just very, very little pressure. I'm trying to get my husband here to show you guys how there's a gap at the bottom. That right there is proof that I did not add enough icing at the bottom. So all I'm doing, and this will happen, I mean, it takes a lot of practice to know exactly how much icing to add where. But you're always going to probably have to do touch-up. So what I'm doing here is just filling in the gaps. Okay, my icing on the top is now perfectly straight, but I have gaps at the bottom where I didn't add enough icing when I first started covering the cake. So no big deal, okay? All you got to do is just go back and fill in the gaps the way that I'm doing. Try to fill it in, you know, not just level with the icing that's already smooth, but a little bit more, okay? That way we don't have to go in there a second time and fill in any gaps. And this is usually what I end up doing every single time that I ice, is having to fill in little gaps here and there. But that's the way that I get my icing smooth. So here I go again, scraping off the bottom and trying to get the bottom part level with the icing that's already smooth and straight at the top. And you'll notice as I'm scraping that the majority of the icing that's coming off is at the bottom, okay? So scraping off the excess, going slow and making sure always, guys, that you're holding your spackling tool at a 90-degree angle. You have to constantly be watching the angle at which you're holding your spackling tool, because if you stop paying attention for a little while, your hand's just going to start going all over the place, and next thing you know, you have sides that aren't straight. So I'm just trying to scrape as much icing as possible at the bottom to where that little line that you see there in the middle until that disappears. Once that disappears, then I know that my icing is completely straight and smooth. I like to take my time and I like to do it right. You know, there's people that ice their cakes very, very, very quickly and can get them perfectly straight. I wish I could do that, but I can't. I have to take my time and I have to really be careful with what I'm doing. So if you can get it done quicker, more power to you. Okay, but usually this is how long it takes me to ice an 8-inch tier. Take my time and do it right. So, you know, just going slow and just making sure that my sides are completely straight. Right now my eye is directed to where the metal of my tool is touching the icing, and I'm being very careful as to how much I'm scraping off. You'll learn from experience after doing this a few times just how much pressure to add and how quickly or how slowly to turn your turntable. As you notice, there's less and less and less icing coming off at the bottom of my spackling tool. There's hardly anything coming off now, and that to me is you know, enough to let me know that I've got it pretty straight now. I'm turning it slowly, looking at my sides, and just making sure that everything's straight. I don't want to have the bottom part sticking out more than the top. So it looks pretty smooth. I mean, it's never going to be 100% perfect, but it's pretty smooth. Okay, this is called a bench scraper. Several brands that you can find on the market. Wilton carries them. You can find them at any Hobby Lobby or Michael's. And what I'm doing now is I am scraping the top, being very careful, okay? You don't press down at all, and all you're doing is just holding your bench scraper level with the top of the cake. And my husband is actually videotaping from above. I'm sitting down on a chair and I'm completely eye level with the surface or the top of my cake. The tendency is for your wrist to do that. You want to keep your hands straight, and at no time should you be pressing down on your cake. All you're doing is holding the scraper off to the side of the edge of the tier, and you're just pulling sideways, very gently, very carefully. Again, you're not pushing down, because when you push down, you're going to start causing the icing to start bulging out right at your edge. Okay? So if you notice, I'm going slow. Every time I scrape off some icing, I clean it with my spatula so I can have a perfectly clean, sharp edge on my bench scraper every time I remove some icing from the top. I'm just pulling sideways. I'm not pushing down. Okay? Now, because we've done this about 7 or 8 times all the way around, if you look at the cake from the top, it's not a perfect circle. Okay, you start getting kind of these straight edges or straight lines, and you don't have a perfect circle, but you'll see how we can get that perfect circle again in just a little bit. I'm asking my husband to show you at eye level how the edges are not perfectly straight, and you might not have such a good view as I do while I was doing this, but as you are turning your cake tier and you're looking at it eye level and turning it slowly, you can actually see little hills and valleys where the icing is not completely flat. So right there, I see a little tiny bump. So very carefully, I just scrape it off. And that's step number 1 to achieving sharp edges, is turn your cake slowly at eye level. If you see a little tiny hump or a little lump or a little hill, you scrape it off. Okay? So this is what I'm doing right now. Now, after I've done all of that, still the edges are nowhere near perfect, okay? We're like halfway to getting sharp edges. So what I'm doing here is I took a Viva paper towel. I like this type of paper towel because it doesn't stick to my icing. And I cut it in half because I like it to be almost the same height as my cake tier. I don't like a bunch of paper towel hanging over, because then that's when you're going to start messing up your icing, okay? So I cut it in half and I put it on the side, and with my fondant smoother, I am applying a pretty good amount of pressure on my cake tier. You have to make sure that your smoother, again, is at a 90-degree angle. You don't want to press harder on the top than on the bottom, or vice versa. And then what I'm actually doing is pressing inward to make sure that the top icing, or the icing at the top of my tier, is completely straight. Okay? Straight on the sides. So as you're pressing the smoother up against the side of the cake tier, you're actually now causing more icing to bulge upward on the edges. So you'll see in a little bit that now this is producing a lot more little bumps and lumps and valleys and peaks on the edge of the tier. But this is very important because this is a step here that we have to take in order to remove more excess icing that we don't need. And as you're removing this excess icing, you'll see that it's going to help you achieve really sharp edges. So pressing in, with a good amount of pressure, and then carefully and slowly peeling the Viva paper towel off. If you rip it off right away, then you're probably going to rip off some icing off of the side of your cake tier. Again, the purpose of doing this is to make sure that any icing that was accidentally pressed down or pushed down while we were scraping icing off of the top, that is now going to be lifted, and now you're going to start seeing little lumps and bumps on the top of the tier. So again, always eye level. I'm sitting on a chair again, and I'm eye level, and now I can see how smoothing the sides caused the top of my icing to now start bulging upward. And this is now what we're going to start to scrape off to get perfectly sharp edges. So hopefully you can see there's little tiny bumps and lumps. And some of you might be saying, oh my God, you can't even see it. What's the big deal? Well, this is the difference between having, sharp edges and a cake tier that doesn't have sharp edges. So right there, I saw a little tiny lump, and I'm scraping it off. This is what gives me sharp edges. Okay? A lot of people do what we just did with a Viva paper towel, and then they just leave it alone. And then they wonder why they have cake tiers that are all bumpy and lumpy. That's why. Okay? Again, I saw another tiny little bump, and I'm scraping it off. Again, not pushing down and not pressing down with my bench scraper. All I'm doing is just letting it lay on the top of the tier, and I just very gently pull away. And the icing that is lifted up just by itself comes and it sticks to the bench scraper. So, if you've ever wanted to know what's the trick that gives you sharp edges, this is it right here. And it is a little bit time consuming, but it's very well worth the amount invested, because once you cover your cake with fondant, the sharp edges will show through. A lot of people don't ice their cake smooth, and they think that they're going to be able to hide it with fondant. You really don't want very thick fondant on your cake tiers. Any little bumps and lumps and holes and stuff like that are always going to show through the fondant. So if you want to know how to get perfectly smooth fondant, you're going to get perfectly smooth fondant by making sure that you have perfectly smooth icing. That's really the only way that you're going to get smooth fondant. So now I'm going all the way around at eye level, looking at my edge and making sure. And there I found one little tiny bump that I didn't like. Scrape it off. And again, start going around little by little, making sure I don't have any bumps. There's another bump. Hopefully you can see it. And it came off. Nice and round. Now that we got rid of all the little bumps on the sides. Taking my fondant smoother, now I can finally smooth the top. You don't need to go again and smooth the sides. There's no point, because they're still perfectly smooth. And all you do is a cross pattern with your paper towel. And if you notice how I'm holding it very, very lightly, I'm not pressing down at all. I'm just letting it slip and slide on the surface of the cake tier to make sure it's perfectly smooth. So hopefully this will help somebody. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. But now you know how I get my cakes nice and straight and smooth with perfectly sharp edges, and hopefully you'll be able to do the same. Thanks everybody. Appreciate my subscribers. Look forward to your comments. Take care. Bye-bye.